Hello again. Alright, so now what we need to do, we've got our materials, we've got our base materials in there, we've got our textures all set up, we've got our geometry in the world, but the problem is that we aren't able to use the multi-channel texture on our material on this because we really don't have a way to set it up. We can set it up for the whole material, but we can't really set it up for any other part of it. And before we get started, I want to point out one thing about Unity and Max and other 3D programs. Unity uses 0 through 3 for the 4 material channels you can mess with. Max uses 1 through 4. So when you say UV0, that means UV1 in Max or in the other engine that you're working in. Just be aware of that. When they say 0, they mean 1, or vice versa. Okay, so we can make this work, but we have to understand how to make our own shader, because remember what we talked about is the material is what we've made, is what right now we're using as the base to hold all our textures, but we want to make a new material type. In Unity and off the back of other programs like Unreal have come up with a way for us to visually do that. There's still going to be some math, there's no way around it, but it's not like crazy math. It's more like what we were just doing inside of Max with adding nodes together. It's node-based coding for us, if you will. It's called Blueprint in Unreal. Sorry, my brain was frozen for a second there. All right, so we have to make our own shader. So how do we make a shader inside of Unity? What is the deal and how crazy is this going to be? We used to have to script it. We don't have to script it anymore. We're going to go into the shader folder that I've made. If you haven't made one, just make a folder called shader. And it doesn't have to be in props. You can have it in art, just default. This shader you make is actually going to be used through any of the materials that may use it. It'll be in a drop down that you make here too. I have some of the previous ones I had. If I went to HDRP and then I go to, actually no, I think it's, if I go to shader graphs, and then you can see some of the base ones I made. So what we need to do is come in here into our shader folder. You always want to keep it organized again, remember, and go into create, and inside create we want to drop down to shaders in front of my face right there, and then we're going to go to HD render pipeline. Yep, another step down, and we're not going to worry about all this base stuff, but we're going to do a lit shader graph, because this is a lit shader, right? It just doesn't have all the things we need yet. So we're going to make it, we're going to modify it a little bit. But before we do that, let's just do a simple shader today. We're not going to get into doing all the extra stuff at this point. So we're just going to say lit shader graph. All right, we'll try that again. Shader. There we go. For whatever reason, it didn't like the first time. So we're going to call this our first shader. All right, pretty simple. So I'm going to move this out of the way, not really take it off the screen, but we're going to come into a game object real quick and have something to put this on, because you need to be able to see it really. So I'll make this cube. And then this shader doesn't drop on here. What we need for this to work is we need something like a material to attach to it. So let's make a material. Normally we could just go in here, make our material, and just say, but the great thing about Unity is that we can move it after the fact. So let's just do it in here so they're all happy together. And we'll just say create, and we'll come down to material, and we'll make a new material, and we'll call it our first shader. Come on, fingers, work with me here. Okay, now we're going to drag this shader onto this object, and right now you can see that there's not much to it. Let me unlock this. We can just look at this one. We can see that it's just a normal base shader. There's nothing on it yet, but as soon as I drag this onto that, so I'm going to take this shader type and I'm going to drag it onto here, it will change. Now, you saw me do it that way, but you also, like I said before, you can go down to the shader graphs and go to our first shader, if that's what you'd rather do. And you'll see in here that now we don't really have control over anything. Everything we have, we see the surface options, but we don't have really anything. We don't have the texture map placements or any of that stuff. So that's why we have to go into our shaders. So let's open up the shader graph by double clicking on it. And then I'm going to move it down here and take up half the screen and go over some stuff with you inside of here. We'll move this over here quiet. Maybe we can get this a little bit smaller. All right, so inside a shader graph, you can zoom in and zoom out by scrolling. If you click and zoom in, it doesn't work, so make sure you're just scrolling, not clicking and scrolling. And we see this right here. It's called a fragment. This is your master shader right here, and it's going to have the base stuff in it. And the difference between this and this is per pixel and this is per vertex. We haven't even really touched on this. This is a normal kind of thing, so don't worry about that normals thing. We'll leave it. We need to leave it attached to it, but we don't really use it. And then if we look at this, we'll see there's a bunch of options up in here like this. So if I open up Blackboard, you'll see we get this pop-up. We'll come back to that in a little bit. If I go open up Graph Inspector, you'll see that it tells me it's an HDRP target because it's an HDRP environment. It's a material. It's a base lit, which means that's the start material we're going to use. We have the surface options aren't really being messed with at this point. Then we have advanced options, and you can see, if you remember, if we go back to our other materials, both of those, let me unlock this here. We have emission, we have advanced options here, and then we have surface options up here. So it's like we're missing all the important stuff, but we have some of the setup ready for us. So we'll go back to shader. And move this on. Okay. So some of these things we can mess with, some of these things we don't really need to. Node settings and stuff like that, we'll go ahead and say, put that out. Main preview is this right here, and you can scale this out to however size you want it to be so you can see what's going on. And then we can look at, again, the Blackboard in a second. So, and then there's ways to set it up so it's by category, and we don't really have anything at this point. So let's make this simple. We're gonna do what we're trying to make is a shader that can be used universally. But let's start by just making it work with what we have. So just like in Max or any other node-based system, I'm going to go to the base color and grab it. And in that base color, I'm going to come down to, this is the weird naming convention they use in here. We want sample 2D or texture, turn up with the unit, texture, and then you can see it right here, 2G RGBA 4. So we'll click on that, and it pops it out. Kind of just like the node. I'm going to close this up, but here's the 2D, and it's called RGB4. And why is it called 4? Because it's got 4 different channels it's exporting out. Okay, and this is base color 3 because it's really only looking at the RGB, but it works because it's got those 3 at least. It does have those 3 listed out. Okay, and then over here you can see that it's got UVs, and we can change the UVs. We're not going to do that quite yet. And then it has a texture spot, so we can actually go into here and go find any of those textures we want. Let's do, let's just do the trim base map, even though it's just going to be splatted across here. We'll do that. So it's a trim base decal. Okay, so I put that on there. Why is it not showing up? Well, this is a little bit different. This is coding, and in code, whenever you make a change, you have to test it and save it. That's the way the computer compiles it and puts it down so we can see it. So in here, they've made it easy. You can see the star just like in Photoshop. We just have to say save asset. And now that texture shows up. Okay, cool. Well, let's try and do another one. And here's the thing, you can close this up so you can just minimize this down. It gets pretty complicated in here, if you can imagine. And then let's go to, let's do normal. So we're gonna do normal transparency, our normal tangent space, which is the standard normal. And again, we're going to do sample and then 2D texture, just like this, like that. And we're going to close this up. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to go to our decal trim normal and double click it. And now it's in there too. And you can start to see that it's working on here if you really want to. You don't have to wait till you save it, but you know, I suggest saving it. Okay, so we got that. We'll put that up for right now. And then we have metallic. Let's go put our metallic on. Let's see, again, oh here, let me show another way to do this. We can grab this, Control D to duplicate it. It's not gonna be the same exactly, and it's still gonna use that texture, but we can fix that. We'll drop that down. We'll go from here to there in the metallic, and now we're getting something. Obviously it's wrong because it's using the decal trim normal. So we're going to come in here, click on that dot, and then go to, oh yeah, let's do it this way. We'll go to decal trim mask map, and we'll double click on it. Okay, so what did I just do? I used the mask map, and if you remember, the mask map does three things, right? It does, well, in our case, it does three things. It is R for metallic, green for ambient occlusion, and alpha channel in our case for the smoothness map. So right now it's taking all four of these and throwing it in there, and it really only wants one. See how it says one? That's because it's looking for one solution for it. So we're going to take this R instead and throw it into there. That's cool. So that should be right. Now what? Well, okay, so this is kind of working right. Now what else are we looking for? Well, we know that the smoothness is the alpha channel, so we can just go straight to the alpha channel and throw it into there. And then it'll start doing the smoothness for us too. So now we've got our smoothness and our alpha. And since we don't really use it, we hadn't used it before in our own texture, but we actually have an AO right here that is the green channel, so we can throw this into the green channel. And after it calculates, it'll put the AO in there for us. So now we're using one texture for all of these things. So awesome. That's cool that we don't have to, we can use our mask map just like they're using it, but we're cutting it into pieces inside of here. The last thing we need is that alpha, right? And let's go back and look at this right here, and we'll look at this decal trim. And basically, if we look at the decal trim base map, and we come over to where it is in here, the texture, we can see, like I said before, let me do it this way. I'll minimize this real quick. We can see that it's RGBA, so there's an alpha channel to it. So okay, it's being used. The alpha channel is not being used because it's only looking for the RGB, but we do have that alpha channel. And if we take that alpha channel and we throw it down there, it's now going to use that alpha channel that's already built in, as long as I grab the right texture. Yep, looks right. To do what we want. Now the problem is we don't have it doing anything like we had to set it up in the last one, right? We had to set it up in the master, or that last shader. We had to tell it inside of the special area to use the mask or the alpha as the transparency. So let's keep going though, and we'll come back and fix that in a second. But the cool thing is we can close this up, or open this up, and then we can move this out of the way, or move it anywhere you want. Put them in places like this, and then we're still getting what we want out of this, and it's pulling out the three textures we need there. It's only showing us what we need to know. Emission, we have one more, right? So we come out here and we try this again. We'll just say sample 2D RGBA, because we definitely want the colors. Pull this back up, and then we'll come to this texture, and we'll just pick this decal emission and throw it up and put it there. And close this up. And now our decal is working. Our emissive is working. So now if we save this, now we haven't saved it in a while, so all these maps we just put in haven't been saved, and therefore they're not added to this, right? So if I save it now though, it should work, right? So if I come back over to this and I look at it, and I can lock it up, that object, we can see that it's using this first shader here, and it's doing all this stuff. And then the thing we need to do is turn on, whoa, they're not the same, right? There's some missing stuff inside here. We'll get to that in the next video, but for now, you get to see that we can customize this like that.
All right, so I had a question from Connor Rogerson. I hope I said that right. So I'm just going to answer it real quick, at least the best way I can. You talked about getting